I'll start by reading out the evacuation procedure. I'll show you. You all know, but I'll read it out anyway. There is a location plan of the exits and the assembly point situated on the doors of this room. Please familiarise yourself with it. On discovering a fire, please carry out the following: sound the alarm, attack the fire if possible and safe to do so using the appliances provided. On hearing the evacuate signal, please carry out the following: exit the building by your nearest safety exit, which, as we know, all visitors report to Assembly Point G. All staff report to their designated assembly point on the Parkway car park. Do not leave the assembly point for any reason until told to do so by the incident controller or fire brigade officer. Anybody who was at the Environment Board last week will know that we did have a fire drill and let's go out to the car park. So probably helps if you brought your coats with you. Apologies for absence. We've had a late apology from Councillor Fowler, and Councillor Bates is unfortunately stuck in traffic at the moment, so he may join us when she can make it. Before we move on, this is the full licence committee doesn't meet very often, so it's 12 months since our last meeting, and in that time we've had an election and we've got several new members, so I'd like to welcome you all to licensing. I always say this at the start of a new committee. I'm not sure that licensing gets the full appreciation of some of the councillors who aren't on licensing, don't really understand the importance of what we do. But I'm always quite proud to be part of licensing, and I hope all of you will be too, because what we do on this committee directly impacts on the lives of very many of our residents, whether they work in licensed professions or whether they're using those services. So what we do and getting it right is really important. I think, I hope you'll sort of take it seriously, enjoy being part of it. Even though the full committee doesn't meet that often, we do have the subcommittees that hear individual cases, and you really get the feel of what licence is about if you're on one of those subcommittees. So again, if you get the chance to go on one of those, I would sort of recommend it. One other thing for new members is you may wonder why we've got two separate licensing committees. Until a couple of years ago, we only had one licensing committee. The legal advice was that we split it into two, and that's because different legislation controls both areas of the licensing, each of the committees. In terms of how it affects us most directly, perhaps as councillors, is that on the alcohol and the alcohol one, we cannot have subs. So if there's a councillor missing, we can't substitute them with somebody else, whereas we can on the taxi and general committee. So things like that are worth remembering. But that is why the committees were split a couple of years ago on legal advice. We generally stick with the same membership of both committees, so there was a slight this time to get the numbers right with the independent councillors, we have a slight difference. So moving on to agenda item 3, does anyone have any disclosure or pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests I would want to declare? Not see any. So move to agenda item 4, public speaking. I can't see. I'm not aware that anybody has asked to speak or sent in any questions. So,
could I just say that I'm new to this committee, and in my working life, I used to deal with licence applications at the Magistrates Court before they were transferred over to local authorities, and I would probably be dealing with at least 2 or 3 hearings every week. So the amount of work that our officers do on licensing and just processing those and checking them and doing that work is quite phenomenal. And I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the unions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Taylor. And it's a very good point. There's a tremendous amount of work just going just in processing the applications. But as we move through the agenda tonight, you'll see that there's a policy which a lot of work is going into as well. So agenda item 5 is the minutes of the Alcohol and Gambling Licensing Committee held on the 24th of January 2023. I'll just read out the couple of page numbers if anybody's got anything they wish to raise. Just let me know. Page 5 and page 2. No comments on that? Okay. Is everyone happy that I sign those as a correct record? Yeah, so someone move that?
So moved.
Moved. Thank you, Councillor. Whoops. Seconded. All in favour? Thank you. That's carried. Agenda item 6. The only report on this particular committee is the general fund revenue budget for 2023-24. Does anyone have any questions on it? Oh, Alison.
Sorry, no, carry on.
So just to say, I haven't got anything in particular that I was going to highlight. I think the information's out, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor.
Just in paragraph 5.1, it suggests that all fees and charges should be increased by at least September CPI. September's CPI figure was really high compared to what the CPI or even the RPI figure is now, and it was just a question as to whether that's the right basis to be setting the increases in fees and charges, particularly when we've got a very difficult economic climate for many of our smaller pubs and clubs in particular. So that was just a question.
So when we did the medium-term financial strategy, which was November, the fees and charges strategy, the guiding principles for fees and charges strategy was that we would take the September CPI for increases where we could, basically. That would be the starting point to take September CPI, but we would also look at benchmarking information. There were some charges where you couldn't do that because competitively you'd lose demand, all of those type of things. So we took, usually financially you do take the September CPI, and that's because of the lead-in time for, because you want your fees to go up by the 1st of April. So you need, you couldn't really take the February CPI, because by the time that information's available, you would have already wanted to set your fees. So that's sort of why we call it September CPI. But actually, these fees, I'm sure Sharon will comment on more if you need more information, but the fees that increases recommended are actually 4%, I think, in the report, rather than the 6.7 anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Anyone else? No further questions or comments? In that case, the recommendation is we approve the budget for 23-24, approve the 2024-25 estimates as presented, and approve the fees and charges as detailed in Appendix C.
Move it.
That's moved by Councillor Jarvis. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Clues, all in favour? That's carried. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the first part of the meeting.
Is it carried?
So you only took votes in favour?
Yeah, that was carried.
You didn't take any votes against or abstain?
Sorry, beg your pardon. Anyone against? I'd like to point that out. Any abstentions? Thank you. That is carried. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the Alcohol and Gambling Licensing Committee meeting, and we move on to the Taxi and General Licensing Committee agenda. Won't bother with the evacuation procedure because we've already done that. The apologies for the absence are the same as before. Councillor Fowler and Councillor Bates may join us if she gets here on time. Disclosure for pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests. No? Okay. No public participation I'm aware of. Agenda item 5, the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of January 2023. In 2 pages. First page, do we have anything on that? Second page. No? Okay. Yeah, so Councillor Jarvis.
It was there was an item put forward of looking at sort of I'll say taxi sharing, for a consultation on that. What's the result of the consultation? So I don't think we've heard anything.
I'll ask Sharon to bring that up. I understand it has been discussed at the in the wider groups when you talk to other councils about it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We discussed it not long after we discussed this at the meeting with our licensing technical group, which is my equivalent at Coventry and all the boroughs in Warwickshire. And they sort of not frowned upon it, but they thought about how difficult it would be to implement. It would involve a different piece of legislation of the Transport Act, and it would have been a difficult thing to implement given the resource we've got at the moment. So we haven't taken it out to consultation as yet. I was speaking to Councillor Jens the other day about this. We've only got 0.8 a licensing officer at the moment, 0.8 FTE, and it's quite difficult to deal with all of the licensing things that we have to deal with, and obviously go out to consultation with something like this. If we believe there was an actual need for it, then obviously we would, and it is a combination of the technicalities of it all. I think it would be quite a difficult thing to implement. I don't know whether there is an actual need for it in the borough. You may tell me differently. If we felt that there was, then we would put it out to consultation, but I'm struggling with resource at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you, Sharon. I think the feeling of the committee last year was that the consultation might have been worthwhile because given the cost of living and the quality of bus services, it might have been an alternative for some users to be able to share a taxi and reduce the cost. Yes, the committee has changed since then, and we appreciate the difficulty of carrying out that consultation. Bringing Councillor Osborne in that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, is it worth just having a look round at any other authorities that deliver similar schemes, see if they're still going in existence, or best practice studies, whether they don't work or whether they're. So that information will all be out there. It's just a matter of
Chair, if I could just come back on that. Yeah. Obviously, we could look at that. I know that there's nowhere in Warwickshire or Coventry that's doing it, but yes, you're right. There may well be other local authorities similar to ours that's very rural, and we know that bus services in rural areas have been cut back significantly. So we could certainly look at other local authorities that are similar to our demographic, similar to our the rurality of the borough, and we could certainly look at that. I might liaise with another one of our teams and see if perhaps they could do it. If I haven't got the resource, another team may be able to help us with that.
Yeah, I think it would be worth, as I say, carrying out a consultation is probably a drain on resources at the moment. But rather than drop the idea altogether, I think if we could look at what is happening elsewhere, and I think if I recall from 12 months ago, it was happening in a few places around the country, not many. If we could look at and get some feedback on that and how that's working as well. Councillor.
I think just on a private level with it, there's a lot of firms like Jaguar Land Rover who I know they've got quite a base going in Nuneaton with sharing, whether that's public transport or private transport. It's something I think is going to move with the times with ordering transport on apps and stuff like that. There are stuff out there to share rather than it becoming a sort of legislation issue. There is that personal choice element that people can use if they want to use it, which a lot of people obviously do. And the JLR one works quite well in Nuneaton, and they've got an open Facebook group and stuff like that. And it's one of them that is going on, but it's just privately rather than borough-wide.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a lot of things to consider from also a safeguarding point of view, because obviously with a licensed cab and things, licensed taxi, we've got all of those safeguarding measures in place. So there's a lot of things to factor in, but I'll certainly obviously research it and look at it. I'm not discounting it.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think we'd find the information useful.
Of course, yeah.
Not do anything with it. Thank you. Are there any other questions on that before we move on to the main part of the agenda? No? Okay. Would somebody like to move the minutes? Moved by Councillor Phillips, seconded by Councillor Jarvis. All in favour? Yep. Passed. Agenda item 6, the General Fund Revenue Budget for 2023-24 revised and the 24-25 estimates and fees and charges. Alison, if you've got anything to tell us.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's the same comment as before, really, in terms of this budget. There isn't anything that I need to highlight as a sort of major concern or variance, and the fees are done on the 4% again in this recommendation, Appendix C.
Okay. Open to the meeting. Anyone, any comments, questions? Councillor Hobley.
Just a general one that the Labour group are still not fully committed with their budget yet, so we will be again abstaining on this.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but you'll likely see a number of taxi and private hire vehicles that are seemingly from Wolverhampton, and you'll see these across the country. There are 36,000 hire vehicles that are registered to Wolverhampton, which obviously delivers a considerable income to that metropolitan borough, impoverished that it is. I don't know how our own fees compare to Wolverhampton, but have we ever considered the possibility of pilfering some of their business to raise our own income?
I'm going to pass that one over to Sharon.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we obviously know the company that's involved in that, and it is all private hire. Another couple of local authorities, as I think Manchester, are looking at jumping on board with the Uber brand, and I think possibly Brighton. It's not something we considered. We license all of our, I'm going to call them taxis, as Hackney Carriage. We dual badge ours, but we haven't looked into joining that particular brand anyway. If that's
Question.
Okay. Anyone else? In that case, I'm going to move to the recommendations, which is to approve the revised budget, to approve the 2024-25 estimates, and to approve the fees and charges as detailed in Appendix C. Moved by Councillor Jarvis, seconded by Councillor. All those in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? It's carried. Thank you. Agenda item 7 is the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1976, fixing the fares for carriages. Would you like to introduce us to this, Sharon?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, our taxi operators have asked for a review of their fees. I think, well, I'm speaking to obviously some new members here. We raised the fees in 2022, July 22, I think it was. But prior to that, they hadn't been raised since 2017. But they've requested a small increase on some of their fares, which you'll see in the report.
Thank you. I think it's about 18 months since the last increase.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. I'm going to open it to the meeting. Any questions for Councillor Jarvis?
Thanks, Chair. Looking at item 2.7, says the committee are asked to consider the request from the taxi owners, which among other factors refers to the impact of the recent increases in fuel costs. As we sit here now, there's some of the lowest fuel costs for several years. Is that something that that we should be mindful of? So at that time, would suggest it was 150, 160 a litre. Now we're down to 135, I think it is, in the co-op at the minute.
Thank you, Councillor Jarvis. It does say that that's only one element of the increase costs. But I do recall that at the meeting 18 months ago, when we agreed to increase the charges, there was talk that if fuel prices fell again, would there be a reduction in taxi fares? Clearly, that's unlikely to happen. But could you respond to Councillor Jarvis's comment?
Yeah, I appreciate that standalone sentence, but there's a lot of other things with the cost of living. Being a lot of them are self-employed. They've got other bills. We lost 20% of our taxi drivers post-COVID. They all found other jobs because it is hard to make a living as a taxi driver. So it isn't just fuel costs, it's cost of the vehicle, cost of maintenance of the vehicle and things like that. Everything, the price of everything is increasing. And whilst fuel may have reduced slightly, it does fluctuate.
Councillor Taylor.
Just an observation on these proposed increases. The fuel doesn't cost any more or any less, whether they're driving between midnight and 6 a.m. or 6 a.m. to 12. Now, I appreciate that the rates per mile and the pickup rates will be higher during those times, but I don't understand the reasoning behind a much higher percentage increase in those figures. So for example, for the first mile in the daytime, the proposed increase is from £4.60 to £4.80. But for the first mile at night, it goes up from £6.90 to £7.20. Surely the increases should be almost the same, bearing in mind that it's a much higher starting point. So it seems to be overly punitive for anybody who's having to get to work for a shift before 6 a.m. in the morning, or for anyone who's actually wanting to use our nighttime economy. It seems a little excessive. I mean, it's not overly, but it just doesn't seem. It seems a little bit out of kilter with the justification, which is for fuel prices. And I am going to sort of disagree with Councillor Jarvis there. Firstly, there is no co-op petrol station in Atherstone anymore.
Sorry,
it's now
Tesco. Yeah.
But secondly, I think fuel prices, most of us will appreciate, they have gone up and down and continue to do so since 2017, when these prices were last increased. And these are, at the end of the day, the people who run the taxi services are small businesses, and they are self-employed workers who are really trying to sort of do the best for their families. So I don't think we can not support the increase, but I think we need to keep it in mind that we need to keep an eye on those excessive increases that are out of hours, certainly in the future, if not this time.
Those are points worth noting. I think I'm right, and so I'm sure you'll correct me, Sharon, if I'm wrong. But we were roughly in the middle across the country. We're roughly in the middle of the band of what people charge.
Yes, Chair.
Will that presumably still be the case after?
Yes, Chair. Yeah, when David died, the licensing officer wrote the report. He did benchmark the fees, and we come out very much in the middle. Yeah.
So we're not excessively expensive or excessively cheap. Just one point of clarification from me. One question to clarify. 2.6 finishes by saying that if there are any objections to the increase, it'll be come back to the committee, which implies the full committee. But the recommendation is that it would go to a subcommittee. So would it be a subcommittee or the full committee that would deal with any objections?
Chair, to be honest, I'd have to check with legal on that, but I would say it should be the full committee. But I would have to check for a definitive answer on
Sorry, just for clarity, petrol prices have dropped slightly, but they were the highest in 21. They're slightly down now in 23. And they sort of undulated between 2013 to 2019, but we are higher than the back end of 2019, just for clarity. So we are higher.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Councillor Stewart.
You're
Sorry.
no, I'm a bit what's it about the wording and the petrol. I would have seen written being the cost of living, so that I can actually say to my elderly residents when they moan about the 20p, which we can understand because they're going through the cost of living as debt, rather than me say to them it's the price of the petrol, because most of the elderly that the councillors are probably here, they only go within the town and they come from Manchester. And this is the bit that just concerns me. It may not be much, but when our elderly residents, this is the only transport that they can get to do their shopping or something else. So that's the only concern that I've got, that they rely on the taxis. But I did find out in a meeting that I was in a week ago that Addiston has got to dial a bus. I didn't know anything about it. And they did say, well, it's not used. I said, well, that's probably because nobody knows anything about it. I'm hoping to find out more and promote that. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor
To help
Stewart
you with
first.
that, Councillor Clears.
Councillor Stewart and then Councillor Wapples.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of points is that it's about balance, all of this. I totally take on board Councillor Taylor's points about the night time, but similarly is that we need to incentivise because there is no public transport, at those kind of times. And if you've got a choice of getting a more expensive taxi or not having access to something that's going to get you to work, you'd much rather have the latter. But I do take on point of Councillor Clues. It is interesting that I know from the 3.8, the first thing I looked for this was the equality implications. Is it going to disproportionately affect any particular aspect? It's listed here that there's no significant impact for any group having protected characteristics. I'd like to have seen a fuller equality impact assessment. See that. I think that when he said there's no significant impacts, any impact if you're unable to do your shopping, if you're unable to get your kids to school, if you're unable to support something else, you're unable to make it to hospital appointment, they are significant impacts to those individuals, and I would like to have seen a fuller equality impact assessment in relation.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Wapples was next, and then Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, thank you. It's just to respond to Councillor Clues. Was that B-line service or is that
It's a different
separate?
one.
Okay. Does B-line also cover Addiston?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. Maybe we should be perhaps supporting them a little bit more. We as a parish council at Polesworth have just awarded a small grant towards their service in our parish particularly, but I think perhaps we need to think about that maybe going forward, that we could try and support some of our local bus, ringer bus, whatever they are called under whatever guise, because this is expensive to some people. We've got barriers for our funds that we won't talk about in this meeting, but we all know about that. So it might not be that they can all access that easily either if they are struggling to get to work early or whatever else and don't meet the thresholds. So, perhaps we should consider as a group looking elsewhere, if not in this group, if we are fortunate enough to be with other hats on, that we can try and support our companies. It's just a point really. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wapples, and I agree with you. What you said about B-line and Kingsbury Parish Council also made a fairly substantial donation, as Councillor Phillips knows. Councillor Taylor, I think, was next.
It was sort of following on from the very helpful comments I think Councillor Stewart made about looking at the impact that this has on different groups. And one of the things that I'm aware of across our borough is that it is almost impossible if you are a wheelchair user to get a taxi. And I don't know that it's not necessarily our job to try and make sure that those things are available, but I think there's certainly a bit more that we can do when we're working with the companies that we license to ask them what facilities they have to take on board passengers who need to stay in their wheelchairs. Because that's the group that I think find it extremely difficult to use public transport or any form of taxis. And I know that Beeline don't have any facilities whatsoever for passengers who need to remain in their wheelchairs. So that sort of means that service is not available to that group of people. And I think as a borough, we should be making efforts to make sure that there are some transport facilities for wheelchair users in our rural areas, because there aren't any bus services, they can't get to hospital appointments, and they end up having to drive themselves and quite often wait at hospital after certain procedures for quite lengthy amounts of time before they can drive their own vehicles back again. So that's something that I think we could perhaps look at. It certainly follows on from what Councillor Stewart was saying. I mean, those facilities are better in some of our parts of our borough because people can access services from Birmingham or from Staffordshire, but certainly in the middle of our borough, that's extremely difficult.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Hobley and then Councillor Osborne.
Just agreeing with what Councillor Taylor said as well, my mum has been a wheelchair user due to a substantial stroke for the last 2 years. And my dad's ended up buying a wheelchair accessible vehicle because she can't leave it at all. But that wasn't my initial point, but I do really agree with that. My point was the UK SPF met in December time and agreed a grant to buy, it sounds terrible, but it wasn't, it's a great idea, buy a minibus from Warwickshire Wildlife Sanctuary, who had a minibus, for the repairs on it, to transport people to other community projects in North Warwickshire. It is on the agenda if you go back and look through the agenda, and it was something that we did grant the funding for, and it was a really, but nobody was aware that it was happening. That's a really good thing for your warm hubs, other sorts of heart health community projects. Sorry, that was granted at UK SPF. So maybe an update on that if there is one. UK SPF are meeting soon. Thursday. So an update on that might be well worth circulating, so the information is available for those who are, more rural, who need to access these community gems.
Some good points being made, but I do want to try and keep the meeting on focused on the fees and charges that were. So, Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it goes back to the question that we were talking about earlier when we were on about sharing the journey and looking into that. Obviously, that will give a little bit better value for some people who really need those journeys, maybe to doctors or hospitals or to go shopping. But they could share a licensed taxi. That I think was the point that we were putting forward. We've got a responsibility not only to the taxi driver, because we do want them, but if the prices continue to rise, then people will start making or trying to do without taxis or make other choices. So it is a fine balancing act, and I think if we were to look at that, at least it's something that we can we try to make a solution as best we can.
Thank you. Is there anyone else before we move to the vote? Can't see any more hands. So the recommendation is that the committee allow an increase in Hackney carriage fares as set out in the proposed table, and that if there are any objections within the statutory period, those objections will be considered by a subcommittee, but we think it's probably the full committee of the council. Well, I'll move that from the chair. Is there a seconder? Councillor Jarvis. All in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? That is carried. So we move to item 8. Consultation on review of the taxi licensing policy. So it's a hefty document, and I think we need to recognise the amount of work that the officers have done in pulling this together. It brings together a number of sort of separate documents that we've used in the past. Quite understandably, in bringing this, in using this document, the officers have looked at similar documents that other councils are using, and I know as a parish council, we sort of pinch bits of documents from other parish councils when we're producing our policies. So it's perhaps not a surprise that there's been a slight oversight. I think it's on Appendix J. I think it is on the advertising, the appendix about advertising. You'll see that there's another council is named in one of the points. I think it's Tamworth Council that points J, and that's simply because in comparing what our officers have come up with compared to other councils, we copied a bit of wording and forgot to change the name of the council, so that will be corrected. But just if nobody had noticed that, I just thought it was worth pointing out. So I think that's the what's happened, isn't it, Sharon? Just
It is, unfortunately, Chair.
And it is a mistake to make, as I say.
It's not the homework copying that's the problem, it's having accidentally given on credit.
Okay.
Can I,
Yeah.
have we advised the relevant authority that that's happened?
Well, it's only a draft document.
That they're not going to take, but equally it's a draft document that has been available for the public. And therefore, I think just as a data breach issue, we perhaps ought to be informing whichever authority it is and just getting the okay from them. I'm sure they won't be too bothered. They'll probably be quite happy that we've that we've used their work as a good example. But I think just from a procedure point of view, it ought to be disclosed to them.
Yeah, they probably took it from literally.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Taylor. Yes, they are aware.
It's fine then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I say it's a fairly document. It seems fairly straightforward and all in order to me. But does anyone have any comments, questions, or objections? No. 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 Well, if no one wishes to comment on it, we'll vote on it. The recommendation is that the committee notes the report and it released to a consultation to review the taxi licensing policy. Then I'll move it from the chair. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Jarvis. All in favour? Anyone against? And the abstentions? No. In that case, the resolution is passed, and that meeting to close. Thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you.